what it is to struggle and what it is to be going through something. And there's just not a lot of empathy there. And at that same time, I had a friend who came back from her Christmas break, was home for 7 days, and spent 6 of those days over hanging out with me. Like, she could have been going out to bars with some of our other friends, but she was sitting on my brother's couch so that he could have a break from taking care of me around the clock and so that I could have company besides my brother. And I was like, oh yeah, this is someone that wants, like, she wants to be here. She wants to be here even when it's not fun. And I think a lot of the same expectations, you know, that you have in a significant other, I have in my friends as well. Like, my spouse is here when it's not fun. Like, I want my friends to be here when it's not fun as well. Oh, and so I lost some very close friendships at that time, which was hard. And it's also taught me a lot about, like, who are my friends. And I have some friends in my life that are just for fun. If I want to go check a cool happy hour spot out, I'll text them.
Nice, yeah.
It's, you know, it's the friends for convenience versus the ones that are like actual friends.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's a really interesting perspective that you said, where you had some people that were complaining about the things that there was a disconnect between you and the fact that you were able to recognize that because of the situation that you were in, but the fact that they didn't see it is even, I think, more telling about what they either saw you or maybe in that case kind of felt like they didn't see you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's a big shift to make though. So like, how did you maneuver through that? Did you just stop texting them? Because I went through kind of the same thing. There were several people who, when I got sick, there was maybe like 2 people who actually physically reached out to me and texted me or called me. I had one person who actually stopped by my house and was like, I haven't heard from you. You haven't texted me back and it's been 2 days. I need to know what's going on. And so that's kind of really how I said, okay, well, this is my group of people who I need to surround myself with, the ones who actually took the time to reach out to me versus waiting for me to reach out to them and then have them look back. What was that process like for you?
A couple of those friendships, I had very clear, like, friendship breakups with them. And it was realizing that, like, okay, me having open heart surgery at that time, that was the way things unfolded then. It made me realize, okay, let me look back at the last few years of this friendship. It's always been very one-sided, and now it's very clear because I'm at a point where, you know, I have casual acquaintances that are saying, hey, how can we help you at this time? And then people that I've considered my best friends not doing anything and realizing that it had been a one-sided friendship. And so, you know, I've talked about, like, I've made posts about complain to your disabled friends. I never want the friends that are like, oh, I don't want to complain to you. You have it worse. No, part of friendship is sharing your struggles and talking about them. And I am probably more practiced at empathy than most people. But there's also the level of, like, if all you're doing is complaining and you're never reaching out to see how I need help, that's when it becomes one-sided. And so taking advantage of that empathy. So it was, with a couple of those friends, it was a very clear, like, this is not going to continue. Like, I don't want to be in this friendship if it'll continue to be that way. And very clear breakups. Others were more just, you know, I stopped reaching out and noticed they didn't reach out either.
Wow. Was that hard for you, like, emotionally, or were you kind of prepared because you saw it and you said, okay, well, this is what's going to happen?
It was hard, and it was also very clear that it needed to happen. So it was heartbreaking, but it was an easy decision to make, I guess, is the best way to phrase that.
I like it. I think that's perfectly said. Absolutely. And you said that this was when you were 20, the second time that you had open heart surgery. When was the first time?
The first time was when I was 9 years old. So much younger.
And that was a couple of years after your diagnosis?
Sort of. They suspected I had Marfan syndrome from when I was a year old. So most of my life, I've sort of had a diagnosis. The criteria for diagnosing Marfan syndrome. Now it's typically done through a genetic testing. At the time, it was done there's a scoring system. Different symptoms have a different score, and once you hit a certain score, you are diagnosed. And so I got diagnosed officially at 6 years old because I had dislocated lenses in my eyes, which is one of the symptoms. And so that was when I was officially diagnosed, but they knew from when I was about a year old that I probably had it. So yeah, it was about 3 years after I was officially diagnosed that I had that surgery.
And how did so do you do regular, I guess as a child, did you do regular testing and go to doctors more frequently than say most children, just because they said, okay, well, we suspect that you have this connective tissue disorder. We want to make sure that nothing kind of progresses or gets past us.
Yeah. So growing up, I saw a cardiologist every 6 months. And then, especially when you're growing, obviously everything is growing faster. Things progress quicker. Once I stopped growing, I now see one every year, unless things start to change again, in which case I'll see them more often. So I saw them every 6 months until I was in my teens at some point, and now I see one every year. So.
Interesting. And so with your connective tissue disorder, because you said you were seeing a cardiologist, does it typically affect the heart most or first, or what does it affect?
It affects everything. That's a good question. Because a lot of people know of Marfan syndrome as a heart condition. It is a connective tissue disorder. I don't know if most common is the right way to phrase it. Probably the biggest risk factor is aortic aneurysms. Oh. And,
that's terrifying.
Yeah. So that's why they keep a good eye on everything. So I'm assuming you know the play Rent.
Yes.
So the playwright who wrote that, Jonathan Larson, he is suspected to have had Marfan syndrome, and he died of an aortic aneurysm because he was undiagnosed. He had a lot of the telltale symptoms of Marfan and having an aneurysm, but he was told it was the stomach flu and sent home, and then he died at home. So it's something that when you're diagnosed, they keep a really good eye on it. And typically if things start to happen and you're diagnosed, you know what the symptoms are, and there's a lot of things they can do for it. If people don't get diagnosed, the average life expectancy used to be about 33 years old.
Oh, yeah.
But doctors,
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it's wild because now the life expectancy, if you're diagnosed, is pretty much the average life expectancy.
Like 75, 85, something, whatever
yeah.
the average is.
And so it's definitely one of those things with a diagnosis, with knowing what to do. You can have a normal life expectancy, but without it, the biggest risk is an aortic aneurysm. So
I guess that would be my next question is, what is your daily routine like? Is it mostly just prevention? Or what are the steps that you take?
Yeah, so I take daily medication. It's a blood pressure medication. I don't have high blood pressure, but most people, so the valves of the heart are essentially loosened. All of the connective tissues in the body are loosened. And so that results in the valve stretching out or the aorta stretching out. So the more your heart beats and the higher your blood pressure is, the more risk there is for that happening. So a lot of people with Marfan syndrome are on blood pressure medications to just lower that for your whole life so that it slows things down, essentially, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I'm on a heart medication. I've been on that. I started on that. I think literally when I got diagnosed at 6 after the eye doctor appointment, we made an appointment with the cardiologist. I started on heart medicine when I was within weeks of that. And I've been on several different ones, but always on a blood pressure medication. I was not allowed to play competitive sports growing up, so I'm not allowed to do any heavy cardio activities. I'm not allowed to I'm not allowed to lift my own body weight. Not allowed to do a lot of any impact sports or anything like that. Because there's risks of further damage to the heart. Impact sports there's a risk of my lenses dislocating with any like sudden stop or start in my eye. So that would be a weird thing to happen. Yeah. So
when it dislocates, like how does do you have to have surgery to have it put back or?
Yeah. So my lenses, I said earlier that my lenses are dislocated. They're slightly dislocated. Some people's are worse. And then they can like dislocate entirely, in which case you do have to have surgery to have them fixed. So that has never happened to me yet, but it could. So
I'm intrigued. I have a lot of questions, but I don't know phrasing yet.
That's okay.
That's so interesting. And so I know we've talked about Marfan's, but you have some other underlying issues as well. How did you go about, were those symptoms that you saw, or was this just part of, your regular checkups and your follow-ups, and because your doctors are paying more closely attention to you, that they caught it?
Yeah, so I have endometriosis. I had surgery last summer to have excision surgery, which is where they go in and remove any endometriosis that they find anywhere in your abdomen. And I had a hysterectomy with that. That one took for me, it was somewhat easy by the time I actually started seeking a diagnosis. I knew what was going on, but I didn't seek a diagnosis until I had been experiencing symptoms for years and years. So I had really, really painful periods that just continued to get worse and worse over the years. And I didn't know that it wasn't normal to have painful periods. And since they just slowly got worse, and I've also always experienced chronic pain. So, being in pain.
Your level of pain tolerance is probably very different from majority of individuals. So you having those painful cycles was probably like, what's new?
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't know it wasn't supposed to be that. Like, I didn't know it shouldn't be that bad. And things started to get worse, around 2018, 2019. I would feel like, I always described it, it felt like there was a wheel of knives in my abdomen, just like circling around. Yeah. And I got really lucky. At the time, I was managing a small restaurant, working next door to a shop where the woman who managed the shop had endometriosis and had multiple surgeries for it, been to multiple specialists. And she was telling me about her journey, and I was like, oh, I think this is I think I have endometriosis. Like, I had known a little bit about it, but I didn't know that much. And from talking to her, I was like, oh, wait, I shouldn't be experiencing all of these symptoms.
Oh, wait, what do you mean this isn't normal?
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I think that's what's going on. And then then in the next 6 months, it got way, way worse. When I would be the week before my period, when I would be on my period, I would go into what I would refer to as a cocoon of pain. I would just lay there and my spouse would talk to me and I would just not even be able to hear or process what he was saying. And it would just be like that for hours at a time, multiple days of the month. And so that was when I was like, okay, I need to actually go see a doctor about this. But I talked to my friend beforehand and I was like, okay, I think I'm going to do this. And she was like, and this is what I recommend to anybody. If you think you know your diagnosis and you're going to a doctor for it, I had a notebook with every symptom written down. I had printed out, from the Mayo Clinic website, the symptoms that line up with that. I had written down the tests that should be used to rule it out. All of these things. I went in there like I was going into some type of legal deposition, ready to fight for this diagnosis. And I think doing that, I do that anytime I go see any new doctor, and the first couple of appointments with a new doctor. And I've learned that they take me a lot more seriously when I come in looking like I'm this is a business meeting.
I would agree with that.
And so I went in with that. I was like, I didn't even have to go through half of what she was like. Yeah, it sounds like you have endometriosis. And I was like, oh, Oh yeah.